Translator Ninetails. Edda Dark Gem village chief blinked lightly, probing with a measured tone. Could his surname also be Qin? Hermit Ching. You let out a cold sneer. That's correct, his surname is indeed Qin. Could it be that Qin Chongming is also an overlord body? Dao brother, your words truly leave me somewhat perplexed. Even our little jade capital has no knowledge of such a thing as an overlord body. So how can you be so certain that such a constitution truly exists beneath the heavens? Village chief slowly rose and descended in the air like drifting cloud mist. He offered no explanation, merely shaking his head. What puzzles me is this. Why would a god from Carefree Village appear here in Little Jade Capital? This senior is one of the founders of Little Jade Capital, Hermit Ching Yu replied. According to the ancient records, he once forged a pact of Earthcount with someone. Later, however, he chose to break it. There were circumstances that forced his hand, and in the end his primordial spirit was seized by Earthcount, while only his body remained behind. Before death came for him, he transformed his divine treasures into 7 divine halls. He planned carefully, so that even after his fall, these 7 halls would remain behind to nurture the future generations. Village chief cast his gaze toward the Hall of 3 Aeons, suspicion flickering in his eyes. 7 divine halls? Then besides the 3 halls here, there should also exist the Hall of 7 Stars, the Hall of Celestial Being, the Hall of Life and Death, and the Hall of Divine Bridge. Why can we not see them? The 7 great divine treasures within the human body are one unified whole, Hermit Ching Yu answered calmly, and thus the 7 divine halls are naturally one as well. All of the other halls are hidden within the Hall of 3 Aeons. Hermit Ching Yu continued, You once asked me to open the Hall of 6 Directions as well. Since I had already opened the other 2 halls, you believed it should be possible. Yet the truth is that Little Jade Capital simply lacks the power to open the Hall of 6 Directions. The god from Carefree Village holds many secrets, and whether the hall can be opened or not is not something I can judge alone. Our Little Jade Capital does not possess enough manpower. Though now that old Dao Master and old Rulai have arrived, it may perhaps be sufficient. However, they have only just reached Little Jade Capital, and they still require time to familiarize themselves with the Hall of 6 Directions. Within Little Jade Capital there were only a little more than a dozen old immortals. To open the Hall of 6 Directions required 6 top-tier practitioners. As for the Hall of 7 Stars, it demanded 7 experts of their caliber. By comparison, Little Jade Capital would be even more short-handed. As I expected, Village Chief said with a faint smile. Though you are stingy, there would have been no need to be this stingy towards someone from Carefree Village, so that is the reason. Hermit Ching Yu snorted coldly. That god cultivated every aspect of himself to the level of a god. His eyes are divine eyes, his hands divine hands, his legs divine legs, and his corporeal body itself is divine. Not only that, even his primordial spirit has reached an incomparably pure level. The density of his magic power is likewise that of a god. Even his wisdom stands on the same level. Dao, brother, if the human emperor chooses to attempt the 3 Aeons breakthrough, I fear he will gain no advantage whatsoever. Village chief fell silent, pondering these words. After a moment he spoke slowly. His magic power has also reached the level of a god? If that is the case, Mu'er has truly encountered a formidable opponent. Hermit Ching, you could not understand the meaning behind his words. We old fellows of disabled elderly village each have our own fields of mastery, and the 9 of us have all reached the god realm within those domains. Yet none of us have ever stepped into the god realm in the aspect of magic power. However, Mu'er's vital chi is so dense that he has achieved exactly that. Though his cultivation realm has yet to reach such heights, the density of his magic power is something no one else beneath heaven could possibly attain. If there truly exists someone in this world whose magic power resembles that of a god, then that person would not be the Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor, but only Mu'er. Village Chief said calmly, Hermit Ching Yu also understood how formidable Qin Mu's cultivation was. You once said that his sword skill is still riddled with flaws, and that if he were to encounter someone whose understanding surpassed his own, he might not even know how he died. I believe he has already met such a person. Village chief's heart trembled violently. This god is also a sword god? Hermit Qingyu nodded, his expression half smiling yet not smiling. Dao brother, can you now explain to me what exactly an overlord body is? Village chief smiled faintly and spoke leisurely. The overlord body is unique beneath the heavens. It surpasses the 4 great spirit bodies and is the rarest constitution in the world. Once an overlord body has appeared in the world, there can never be a second overlord body. However, there will inevitably appear pseudo-overlord bodies who compete for the destiny of the overlord body. Within the Hall of 3 Aeons, Qinmu widened his stride as he chased the young god. Each step of his was heavy as a falling mountain, yet his speed was astonishingly swift. Whenever his feet struck the ground, soil burst into the air and the land rippled with trembling waves. The soil and shattered stones that rose into the air were melted instantly. Some transformed into pottery swords, while others became stone blades. Certain rocks concealed traces of metal within them, which were smelted by Qinmu's power and forged into sharp flying swords. Forging treasures within the heat of battle was Qinmu's supreme art, something that Mute had never personally taught him. Applying knowledge in the midst of combat was Qinmu's own expertise. Since he could not use the spirit weapons he had originally brought with him, he could only forge new ones on the spot. When the distance between the two shrank to roughly 300 yards, Qinmu already had 100 flying swords circling around him. At that instant, he unleashed his sword technique. The move he executed was sword-treading mountains and rivers. Qinmu recited the name in his heart with heroic fervor. Could the gods be slain? Say it aloud. They can. Sword light erupted brilliantly as the flying swords streaked toward the young god. The flashes of sword light surged like tides. Yet 100 flying swords were still too few, so more sword light burst forth from Qinmu's own body to fill the void. He surged forward at incredible speed. Sword-treading mountains and rivers unfurled mountains and rivers across the horizon like a vast painting scroll opening in the wind. Within this sword technique lay every form of learning he possessed. His own insights, the teachings of village chief, the enlightenment granted by the imperial preceptor, and the guidance of Qin Hanjin. All that he had learned had been forged into this single sword. The power of the sword light soared dramatically. This was Qinmu's most powerful move. Even the second move, Sword of Founding Emperor Sea of Blood, could not compare with it in terms of raw power. That was because Qinmu had poured his heart and soul into sword-treading mountains and rivers, refining and improving this move above all others. Compared to the sword-treading mountains and rivers once taught to him by village chief, the power of this move had increased several times over. Yet as he unleashed his sword skill, sword light also erupted from the palm of the young god. Countless sword lights shot forth. Qinmu was momentarily stunned as he perceived the mysterious principles contained within those sword lights. Carefree Village's sword skills. He is from Carefree Village. Qinmu had no time to ponder further. The two sword techniques collided head-on. Countless sword lights swallowed them both. The immense power hidden within the mountains and rivers burst forth, while the might of the Carefree sword technique also surged dramatically. The elders of the 3 Aeons stood upon the sun, the moon, and the towering mountain as they gazed downward. In the moment when the mountains and rivers shattered apart, they saw boundless energy erupt like 2 snow-white spheres expanding violently outward. Remarkable, Heaven Aeon Spiritual Master exclaimed from within the blazing sun. The power of the two techniques detonated until nothing remained. Qinmu and the young god were flung backward before crashing heavily onto the ground. Their bodies tumbled uncontrollably down the slopes like ragdolls, limbs flailing helplessly. Pack! Qinmu slammed into a cliff face. Sword wounds covered his body, and fresh blood splattered across the stone wall like blooming flowers. My sword skills! Qinmu coughed up blood as he slid slowly down the cliff. With a dull thud, he landed on the ground, astonishment still frozen across his face. I've lost. This was the first time he had used his perfected sword technique, and yet he had been cleanly defeated. His sword skill had been completely broken by the opponent. The young god likewise crashed into a mountain with a thunderous bang, dislodging massive rocks that cascaded down the slope. There were no sword wounds on his body, but the force of Qin Mu's attack had far exceeded what his body could withstand. In terms of pure sword skill, the young god indeed surpassed Qin Mu. Though Qin Mu had controlled around 100 swords and several hundred swordlights with sword-treading mountains and rivers, not a single strike had landed upon him. Yet the terrifying power contained within Qin Mu's attack had severely injured him. When the sword skill exploded, the violent energy swallowed him whole. Even without being struck directly, the cracking sound of his ribs could still be heard. The young god appeared incapable of feeling pain. He shook his arms and tore himself free from the mountain rock. Sliding forward several dozen yards, he landed steadily upon the ground. Beneath his armpits, broken ribs had already pierced through his skin, their jagged ends exposed to the air, yet he seemed utterly indifferent. Raising his hand, he grasped the protruding bones and pulled them out, tossing them casually onto the ground. Below the cliff, Qin Mu staggered to his feet. With a roar, he circulated the human king creation technique, sealing the wounds across his body. He chose not to use the dragon saliva to heal himself because the opponent's sword intent was hidden within his wounds. Without removing it first, even dragon saliva could not heal such injuries. Besides, the opponent had not healed himself either. Qin Mu would rather fight him fairly. The Overlord body stands unrivaled beneath the heavens. If I cannot defeat you, it only means I have not worked hard enough. Qin Mu activated the Overlord body 3 elixir technique. In an instant, he transformed into a cow-headed human standing upon twin dragons. Bull eyes sprouted upon his forehead and rolled wildly. Flames blazed fiercely around his body as the 2 dragons beneath his feet charged straight toward the young god. Using sword-treading mountains and rivers had greatly exhausted Qin Mu. If he continued fighting in that manner, he would soon collapse. So he needed to change his strategy. The body of the young god also transformed. He assumed the form of the Venus Sovereign, likewise standing upon twin dragons. Yet the dragons beneath him were formed from golden chi, while the dragons beneath Qin Mu were forged from blazing fire chi. The twin dragons beneath their feet surged forward. Suddenly, both combatants changed direction, charging horizontally toward a nearby mountain. The enormous dragons clawed into the cliff face and ascended as though flying up the mountain wall. Upon their backs, the 2 warriors in their transformed states unleashed their most powerful divine arts, striking fiercely at one another. The mountain was extremely tall. It was the very mountain upon which Earth Aeon's spiritual master stood. Though it already towered 3,000 yards high, Qin Mu and the young god battled all the way up toward the summit. Their techniques changed again and again. The 5 great divine transformation states of the 5 elements realm were displayed in succession. At times they assumed the form of the human-headed Jupiter Sovereign with the body of a bird, while at other moments they became the human-headed Saturn Sovereign with the body of a serpent, or the scarlet-haired Mercury Sovereign. Each transformation unleashed its might as they fought with everything they had. Earth Aeon's spiritual master raised both hands, and the great mountain beneath him began to grow taller. The entire mountain range expanded, rising higher and broader. Qin Mu and the young god continued ascending, while rocks were blasted in every direction by the chaos of their battle. His magic power is no weaker than mine. He truly must be an overlord body. Qin Mu was inwardly shocked beyond measure. He had already lost the initiative and was forced onto the defensive, continually refining rocks and stones into swords of stone, iron, and copper in hopes of gaining advantage through weapons. However, because his attention was divided, he was gradually suppressed. Though the young god stood below him, Qin Mu was forced to retreat upward. The flying swords he forged were struck aside one after another, leaving behind a trail of shattered blades scattered across the mountainside. The 2 figures clung almost flat against the cliff as they continued sprinting upward, neither showing the slightest sign of slowing. This mountain cannot grow any taller. If it continues rising, it will collapse. Earth Aeon's spiritual master frowned. Just as he was preparing to leave the summit so the 2 fighters could continue their battle freely, Qin Mu suddenly mobilized all of his magic power. Human Emperor is still too young. He forged far too many flying swords and exhausted a great portion of his magic power. Now he is relying solely on brute force against the young god. I fear he may not win." As Earth Aeon Spiritual Master spoke these words, a violent vibration erupted between the two combatants. Both were blasted away from the mountain. Qin was flung high into the sky while the young god was hurled downward. Qin struggled to halt his body mid-air, but the wounds covering him instantly split open again, blood spraying outward. "The outcome is decided," he shouted as he dove downward. Everywhere he passed, the stone, iron, and copper swords flew forth to attack the young god. The entire mountain was filled with the countless swords he had forged during the battle. At that moment, an immeasurable number of blades answered his command. The blades surged toward the young god, leaving him no chance to evade. His vital chi exploded outward as he executed his sword technique. Swordlight condensed like a raging storm and clashed violently against the incoming swords. His sword skill was indeed profound, but he had lost the favorable position and was driven downward toward the foot of the mountain by the overwhelming force from above. Meanwhile, along the cliff face, even more stone, iron, and copper swords erupted outward, merging into a surging flood of blades. Each sword moved with a different speed and rhythm, some slow, some swift, some advancing, some retreating. The technique Qin unleashed was still sword treading mountains and rivers, the move of greatest power. From time to time, the young god's sword light would pierce through the rain of blades, leaving more and more wounds across the youth's body. Qin seemed incapable of feeling pain as he continued pressing downward with relentless sword attacks, driving the young god toward the ground. The earth drew closer and closer. "You've lost." Qin revealed a smile as countless swords slammed the young god ruthlessly into the ground. Boom! The earth trembled violently. Wind swept chunks of shattered mountain rock in every direction. A vast and deep crater appeared in the ground, surrounded by broken blades. Bang! Qin also crashed down, creating another crater only slightly smaller. From within it came his feeble voice. "You are a pseudo-overlord body, heh." At that moment, movement suddenly sounded from the other crater. Qin blood ran cold. "You're still alive?" Translator, Ninetales. Editor, Dark Gem. Qin struggled to rise to his feet when crisp, cracking sounds suddenly rang from his legs. The bones there had already fractured when he had been smashed earlier, and the moment he exerted even the slightest strength, they broke apart again. His entire body convulsed violently from the agony, and his arms fractured as well. Qin no longer dared to move. Even a slight twitch or a deeper breath became something he feared to attempt. He was afraid that a single forceful inhale might shatter every bone in his body. His magic power had been completely drained, leaving him unable even to retrieve the dragon saliva stored within his Tao-Ti sac to treat his wounds. Pain surged through him like a relentless tide, and beads of cold sweat streamed continuously down his body. The sword wounds covering him split open one after another, and fresh blood flowed freely. Qin felt his body gradually becoming warmer, as though molten lava were coursing beneath his skin. However, he knew this sensation was merely an illusion. Because he had lost too much blood, his body was steadily growing colder, creating a deceptive warmth within his mind. He had once heard a apothecary explain this phenomenon. If the blood loss continued, death would be inevitable. A violent explosion erupted from the massive pit nearby, and Qin felt his heart grow heavy with despair. Could it be that I'm the pseudo-overlord body? No, it's just that I haven't worked hard enough. I haven't yet unleashed the full potential of the overlord body. He had wagered almost his entire life to win by half a move, and that desperate victory had drained every last drop of his battle power. Suddenly, 3 torrents of air currents burst forth from the enormous pit. They descended upon Qin like 3 magnificent rainbows, streaking across the sky before plunging directly into his body. At that instant, Qin felt his bones shift and reconnect. The fractures sealed together, and the wounds across his body began to heal at astonishing speed. Even the few teeth that had been knocked out earlier in the fight were actually growing back. Qin was utterly stunned. Yet before he could gather his thoughts, he heard the sound of surging water. The roar came from within his own body, originating from his violently churning vital chi. His cultivation was actually recovering with incredible speed. His strength was also returning. Torn muscles knitted themselves together, and in a short while nearly all of his injuries had healed. Not only that, he could clearly feel the strange power carried by the 3 rainbow streams stirring profound changes within his spirit embryo divine treasure. His vital chi seemed to liquefy as it embraced the treasure, making it appear as though the spirit embryo were soaking in a boundless, warm ocean of energy that was incomparably comfortable. The last time I felt something this comfortable was probably when I was about 3 years old. I had fallen asleep on Granny's bed and desperately searched for a latrine in my dream. After finally finding one with great difficulty, I ended up wetting the entire bed. Granny then grabbed me by the leg and tossed me straight into the snow. Chin-Mu blinked slowly. What he was experiencing must be the legendary 3 Aeons: Heaven Aeon, Earth Aeon, and Water Aeon. The energies of the 3 Aeons surged into him in wave, and his spirit embryo divine treasure underwent a tremendous transformation. It grew rapidly while the spirit platform beneath its feet expanded as well. It resembled a small island rising from the middle of an endless sea. The vital chi exhaled from the spirit embryo's nose rose into the air, and the surging vital chi gathered around it, gradually forming a bright crimson sphere that hovered in mid-air. Yet it did not resemble a sun. The liquefied vital chi condensed together like a sphere of water, but it was not the moon either. His spirit embryo divine treasure still could not compare to that of a true god. Chin-Mu attempted to circulate the Overlord Body 3 elixir technique and discovered that it was still difficult to execute. There must still be hidden injuries within his body that had yet to fully recover. Congratulations, Human Emperor, for achieving the 3 Aeons breakthrough. In an instant, the surrounding mountains vanished, and the sun and moon suspended in the heavens disappeared without leaving a trace. Chin-Mu found himself lying within a vast hall, the icy floor beneath him sending chills through his body. He struggled to rise and saw 5 elders seated at 5 separate positions. They sat high above, their appearances ancient and solemn, resembling elders who had endured the passage of 3 Aeons. He looked around, only to realize that this was not the Hall of 3 Aeons he had seen earlier. The place resembled another enormous hall entirely. Even the appearances of these 5 elders differed from those of the 3 Aeons elders. Chin-Mu steadied himself as waves of soreness coursed through his muscles. His arms and legs trembled uncontrollably, refusing to obey him. "Where are the 3 old immortals from earlier?" Chin-Mu asked with a trembling voice. "The 3 Aeons elders are not here." One of the old wanderers, though short in stature, possessed a voice that was thunderously clear. "We are the 5 elements wanderers, and this place is the Hall of 5 Chi. From this hall we witnessed Human Emperor accomplishing the 3 Aeons breakthrough, and we admire you greatly. After Human Emperor achieved the breakthrough, you were sent here to the Hall of 5 Chi to face the trial of the 5 Chi." "I achieved the 3 Aeons breakthrough?" Chin-Mu was both startled and delighted. Yet his legs refused to listen to him and continued trembling uncontrollably. "He really is the pseudo-overlord body, while I'm the true overlord body," the youth thought proudly. The 5 elements wanderers heard his words and became confused. They revealed puzzled expressions, for they had never heard of what an overlord body or pseudo-overlord body was. Chin-Mu tried his best to stand firmly, but his legs continued shaking violently. His arms also refused to obey him. One of the old wanderers frowned slightly and said, "Human Emperor is the second person to pass the 3 Aeons breakthrough. Do you intend to challenge the 5 Chi breakthrough?" Chin-Mu simply sat down on the ground so that he would not embarrass himself by failing to stand steadily. He asked, "How does the 5 Chi breakthrough compare to the 3 Aeons breakthrough?" "It is slightly more difficult. When Human Emperor completed the 3 Aeons breakthrough, your foundation became even more solid. Thus, the 5 Chi breakthrough should not be overly difficult for you," an elderly woman said with a gentle smile. "It's still slightly more difficult." Chin-Mu was startled and quickly shook his head. "5 seniors, could you perhaps bend the regulations and allow me to challenge it another day?" At that moment, he was simply far too weak to attempt the 5 Chi breakthrough. Even though he had completed the 3 Aeons by defeating the young god and most of his injuries had healed, The soreness in his corporeal body had not diminished in the slightest. Moreover, the final strike, when he descended from a mountain several thousand yards high, had delivered an impact too immense for his heart to endure. Not only was his corporeal body trembling, even his soul swayed unsteadily, as though it might leave his body at any moment. The five wanderers could see that his condition was far from ideal, so they exchanged glances with one another. One of the elders said, "Our little jade capital has never encountered such a situation before. If someone passes the trial of the 3 aeons, they may enter our Hall of 5 Chi and depart only after being defeated. Taking a rest midway has never happened." An elderly woman then spoke. "However, the 3 aeons breakthrough is exceedingly rare. The last person to achieve it lived 7,000 years ago. Since Human Emperor has reached this step, it would indeed be too harsh if we refused to allow him to challenge the Hall on another day." The 5 elders discussed the matter for a moment before the leading elder said, "Since Human Emperor has made this request, our little jade capital will not be so rigid. When Human Emperor has recovered, you may return and challenge our Hall of 5 Chi." "Many thanks." Qin Mu struggled to rise and express his gratitude to the 5 elders. The moment he straightened his back, the scenery before him shifted once more. He found himself standing outside the Hall of 3 Aeons. The 3 Aeons elders were speaking with Hermit Qing Yu, whose face displayed astonishment, while Village Chief wore a quiet expression of pride. Human Emperor. The 3 Aeons elders greeted him. Heaven Aeon's spiritual master asked in surprise, "Why has Human Emperor come out before undergoing the trial of the 5 Chi?" Qin Mu's legs continued to tremble as he replied, "The 5 Elements wanderers saw that my condition was not good, so they allowed me to return later for the challenge. Immortal Qing Yu, may I have a few days before attempting the trial in the Hall of 5 Chi?" Hermit Qing Yu's expression softened, and he said firmly, "Human Emperor's condition indeed makes it unsuitable for you to continue fighting. There is still the Hall of 6 Directions after the Hall of 5 Chi, and Old Dao Master and Old Rulai also require time to familiarize themselves with it. Very well, Human Emperor may return to our little jade capital another day to break through both halls." Qin Mu cautiously asked, "In that case, regarding inviting the experts of Little Jade Capital to descend the mountain?" Hermit Qing Yu smiled. "I promised that I would accompany you if you defeated the 3 disciples of my Little Jade Capital. Now that you have even achieved the 3 Aeons breakthrough, you have surpassed my expectations. Since I have made a promise, I naturally cannot go back on my word." Qin Mu was astonished. Hermit Qing, you had not shown him a single pleasant expression since he arrived on the mountain and had scorned him from the beginning. Yet now he was suddenly so easy to negotiate with? Hermit Qing Yu looked toward the 3 Aeons elders and said, "3 senior brothers, I shall accompany Human Emperor down the mountain to settle some worldly matters. During these days that I will not remain on the mountain, I ask my senior brothers to help watch over my duties." Water Aeon's spiritual master said, "The affairs of the mortal world are full of distractions, and the hearts of immortals are easily disturbed. Be careful not to disturb your clear heart when you descend the mountain." Hermit Qing, you smiled faintly. "I have already experienced the mortal world once before, and my mortal heart has long since died. Do not worry, I will certainly return." He summoned Wang Moran, Mu Qingdai, and Long Yu over and said, "I will be descending the mountain with Human Emperor, so the 3 of you shall accompany me. There is no need for you to remain in Little Jade Capital for your entire lives. I know there is little joy in spending all your days accompanying us old men and women." The 3 were both surprised and delighted. They had long wished to leave the mountain, yet Little Jade Capital had strict rules, and Hermit Qing, you would never have allowed them to descend under normal circumstances. Hermit Qing Yu then excused himself from Old Dao Master and Old Rulai. The 2 elders smiled. "We have only just freed ourselves from worldly affairs and come to Little Jade Capital seeking peace. Yet now you are leaping back into the mortal world. Immortal Qing Yu, I fear that once you are tainted by worldly dust, you may never leap back out again." "You 2 worry too much. I am merely going down to fulfill a promise and will return once it is done. The affairs of the mortal world cannot bind me. Hermit Ching-Yu replied solemnly. I hope so. Hermit Ching-Yu then invited 2 more old immortals. Yu Yun, Yu He, the 2 of you senior brothers are proficient in algebra. Will you accompany me down the mountain? The 2 old immortals smiled. It would be good to go down and take a stroll. Wang Muran rode upon a buck that was once the mount of Wanderer Zhen. That master had perished at the hands of Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor, but his mount had been kept by Wang Muran. The buck was in no way inferior to the dragon Qilin. Because the dragon Qilin was somewhat plump, the buck appeared even more muscular by comparison. It cast sideways glances at the dragon Qilin, its eyes brimming with disdain for the fat creature. The dragon Qilin had long grown accustomed to such looks and paid no attention. Yet Xiong Qie whispered to him, Fatty dragon, that buck is looking down on you. Even if he spat in my face, it would dry on its own without needing to be wiped away. The dragon Qilin appeared to have already reached enlightenment. Let him think whatever he wishes. It is merely a cool breeze brushing past a mountain. The group departed from Little Jade Capital. Hermit Ching, you turned back to glance at the mountain once more. With a sigh filled with emotion, he said to Village Chief, Many years ago, I left this place together with you. My heart was full of ambition, wishing to accomplish a world-shaking feat alongside you. When I returned, my will was low, and my grand ambitions had been wiped away completely. I thought I would never leave again. Yet, who would have expected that I would be invited out of Little Jade Capital by your disciple? Fate truly toys with people. It was not Mu'er who invited you, but rather your own heart that moved, Village Chief said meaningfully. Is it the wind that moves, or the banner that moves? It is merely the human heart that moves. Hermit Ching, you laughed loudly. You are wrong. My mortal heart has long been dead. It will never come back to life. Village Chief shook his head with a smile. Your mouth is as sharp as a blade, yet your heart is as soft as tofu. Mu'er, do not be deceived by how fierce this old fellow appears toward you. In truth, he is the softest of them all. If you make him sad, his tofu heart will scatter across the ground, and no one will be able to piece it back together. Hermit Ching, you sneered. My heart cannot be pieced back together. A moment ago, weren't you the one lying on the ground and crying? Village Chief was instantly furious. When Fairy Shui Qi abandoned you back then, who was the one sprawled on the ground, bawling like a child? You were crying miserably just now and needed Human Emperor to hug you. When you shamelessly cried and begged for reconciliation, did you think I wouldn't use that against you now? You even wiped your snot on Human Emperor's chest. Qin Mu stared with his eyes wide open. The 2 old men, whose combined ages approached 1,600 years, were still quarrelling endlessly, exposing each other's flaws and digging up embarrassing events from the distant past. They are becoming younger and younger. They're like old children. Qin Mu shook his head and thought to himself, where did Grandpa Cripple go? If the experts of Dao Sect didn't catch up to him, he should have entered Little Jade Capital long ago. I was delayed here for 2 or 3 days, so it should have been enough time for Grandpa Cripple to rummage through Little Jade Capital several times. Also, I wonder how the battle on the prairie is going. Did Imperial Preceptor reach Roland's Golden Palace? On the vast snow mountain outside Roland's Golden Palace, a massacre was taking place. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his expression indifferent. His gaze fell upon the magnificent palace ahead, adorned with gold and jade in dazzling splendor. Behind him, the army of Eternal Peace, tens of thousands strong, stood in perfectly ordered ranks. The soldiers made no sound, and even the strange beasts of war accompanying the army remained utterly silent. A general stepped forward and bowed respectfully. Imperial Preceptor, Khan Ruandi has come to surrender.